So let's do this. As you can see, the title of this webinar is East Coast Meets West Coast. I don't know if everyone is aware of this, but in 2020, Millrose, which has a very strong presence in the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic, merged with Permit Advisors, who's located in Los Angeles, and subsequently created the leading code zoning and permitting firm in the US. And since then, we've worked on a lot of national programs together and thought it might be interesting to get together and discuss the ins and outs. And so I've got a couple of experts here, Cava and Roy Hasson. I never get your name right, Roy. But you keep telling me it doesn't matter, so
it doesn't matter.
I have no motive to get it right. But anyway, let me not try to do justice to them. I'll let each of them say a little bit about themselves. Al, you want to go first?
Sure thing. Thanks, Jason. First, just like to thank everyone for joining, and nice to see colleagues and friends participating in our webinar. So Al Cava, I'm VP of Strategic Accounts for Millrose, over 13 years with the firm. I spent a lot of my time building outer regions for the firm. Everything from Long Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Philly, down into DC. And was a part of many retail programs over the years in the wireless side, banking, telecom, and most recently some experiential and dark retail as the face of retail has changed. So happy to be participating, and hopefully you find this informative and helpful in planning your future rollouts.
All right, great. Thanks, Al. How about you, Roy?
Everybody, hope everyone's
fine. I'll just keep pronouncing it different names. Different ways.
Hope everyone is doing well. I'm Roy Hasson. Good to see some familiar faces. Thanks for joining. I am the president here at Permit Advisors. I helped build a 40-man national permit expediting firm, very strong on the retail side, and so very excited to be part of the Millrose family and take permitting national and other services. So look forward to speaking today about kind of permitting across the country, what it looks like, what it's going to look like, and help answer any questions.
All right, great. Thanks, Roy. Okay, so let's got a few questions prepared here. We'll have a kind of an organic discussion. I'm going to actually kill my video, not only because I want people focused on you, but you both outdressed me today with your blazers, and I continually be shamed by being up there with such fancy folks. Okay, so let me start with you, Roy. So obviously the topic of this is national retail rollout. So I guess it kind of begs the question, how is a national rollout of, say, retail stores different from constructing, a single commercial office building? I mean, why is this a topic?
Good question, Jason. No, but that is a great question. And a lot of people wouldn't understand the magnitude of a rollout program if they haven't done one. And I think the key differentiating items in a rollout program versus a single building is multiple jurisdictions at a given time, different requirements across the country. Retail programs, a lot of them have quarterly deadlines, store opening deadlines in different quarters, different time zones. So if you're not local to that city right away, you're dealing with different time zones. So you have to be up at 5 a.m. calling the city or vice versa. And so I think the biggest difference is really just navigating, if you're in 40 different cities, 40 different personalities and 40 different requirements, and making sure that you don't forget each requirement of every single jurisdiction. So that's kind of the key differentiator for me for a rollout versus a single building. Al, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, and just to add to it, I mean, look, typically we likely dealing with existing spaces, right? So, when we're an office building, you might be doing a B2B renovation, like in kind, as of right, with retail. Oftentimes it's not always, going from a retail to retail use. We're dealing with existing legacy spaces. They may be open applications, violations, et cetera, that we need to pick up and plan for. And so for me, that's oftentimes a big differentiator. Also proximity to residential and noise and things like that, signage, those types of components. There's, multiple sensitivities there. And then also just generally, rollouts tend to have more or less a concept, similar finishes and materials and installations, as the prototypes rather of how these brands want to come to market, and doesn't always necessarily fit hand in glove in every market you go in. So naturally, we also have to work through some of the requirements and, UL ratings of certain materials and finishes. So it's, I see that as some key differentiators.
Great. So also in the title is East meets West. Start with you this time, Al. I mean, you're located on the East Coast. Roy's obviously in California. So having worked together on national rollouts, what do you see as the key differences in the two markets? Not only whether you want to define it as the Northeast or the East Coast, or however you want to define it. I mean, where have you seen things that made you turn your head sideways and go, huh?
Yeah. Tough to just call it East versus West, because really it varies city to city. But generally speaking, what I will say is my key differentiator is the zoning. I'll give it to the West Coast. They are much more progressive and forward thinking as it relates to concepts and so forth. And, as far as my experience goes, it's always been the challenge of having to, especially lately with, creative retail, experiential retail, having to get these types of concepts, baked in with a local planning department, and really getting them to understand is how we would fit into their current master plan and their zoning map for their particular city or suburb. So that's always been a major challenge for me, just given the changing face of retail. And then you take also, the online and delivery models that we're seeing lately, and that adds another, layer of complexity as it relates to last mile delivery of grocery and other goods. So for me, those are some of the bigger challenges, because in the East, you have a lot of, New York City's got a lot of neighborhood commissions. DC, you've got local advisory neighborhood commissions. You need to overcome and make sure you're properly backing into those rules and regs. In Boston, various wards have various more restrictive standards. So those types of things, Philly too, are for me, the biggest challenges at the outset of a job is really sort of laying out what is your use. And if you have a multitude of uses, giving, you have a point of sale, but you also have a maker element to your space, and also maybe a F&B assembly element to it. How do we marry all those uses? Do they need to be compartmentalized? Do they need to be filed as sort of non-separated occupancy? All these types of things come into play and sort of differentiate, at least I believe, East to West.
I'm going to add to that. Can I add to that too? Is that all right?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I was saying
it's kind of your job, Roy. That's why you're here.
So, if you look at the United States, you deal with a lot more historic buildings on the East Coast. When you come to California, there aren't really a lot of historic buildings here. But in that whole New England, the East Coast is filled with historic buildings. So you're going to come across, kind of more historic issues, more historic reviews in the East Coast. But, California, we can't let it be easy for anybody. So in California, disabled access, handicap accessibility, it's kind of everybody's nightmare. Every little thing has to be handicap accessible. And so there's definitely key differentiators in different markets where historic is big in one, health is huge on the West Coast. Bob's Discount Furniture is one of our clients, and we permit the furniture stores, but they have a little coffee machine, and we need a month and a half to get a little coffee machine approved by the health department, and it's free coffee. We're not even selling it. So I think the West Coast is huge on disabled access and health, and I think the East Coast is huge on historic, and that's one point for me.
Yeah, my in-laws live in Georgetown in Washington, D.C., and you can barely plant a flower without having to get approval from the historical commission. And yeah, it's just it looks nice. It looks old. All right, well, Rory, back to you. So, given the complexities, we just discussed, I mean, how do you set this up? How do you plan for a national rollout so that you don't, get caught along the way and get stuck with delays and rejections, things like that.
Yeah, I think setting up is probably one of the most important things in setting up a rollout program. And for anyone listening, take notes. No, but it's really important to set up a rollout program properly. The first thing is, what is your scope of work? What are we doing to these spaces? Typically, it's generic. Most stores want to have one series of scope of work. It obviously is different for every site, but what is the scope of work, and what is it? What do we do? What is the use of your brand? What are you doing? Are you a furniture retail store? Are you a furniture manufacturing store? Are you a food establishment or retail? And really identifying exactly what your use is, so you could pitch that use. For example, if we look at urgent cares, are you a medical office or are you a urgent care facility? So understanding what your use is exactly is really important. That's the first thing we like to do when we take on a rollout program. And then what jurisdictions are you going into? Let's have an idea. Send me all the jurisdictions. What markets are we tapping into? What cities are we going into? Then laying out your milestone dates. What are your plan out dates? What are your construction start dates? So we can log all that in and make sure we meet those key dates for you. And then basically execute all the due diligence properly, knowing that what city everything is in, what all the requirements are for each particular city, and who the players are. But I'll get into that a little bit later. Those are kind of what's most important for me.
How do you do, Al?
Yeah, no, right on point, Roy. But just to add to it, identifying, proper sequencing, is there any ability to basically take advantage of any breakout packages, whether it's an early roughing, framing, or early demo, or we need to get creative because of some other use that we need to get pre-approved on a prior agency. Can we kind of shelve that scope, carve that out? So kind of, breaking out based on the schedule and nature of the program. Other things would be, during that due diligence, really trying to understand, the escalation channels also within the city. And as Roy mentioned, I'd like to talk about that a little bit later, but, how do we work with the, building code and subcode officials, but also work and marry with planning and zoning folks that may also dot up to IDAs and mayor's offices, and kind of really understanding what our avenues of escalation are alongside the end user and us as a boots on the ground extension of them. So a lot of that is very important to get broken out early on. I see the six P's in life just came up on the board, so right on point, Scott, thank you. But it's a lot of those types of things to get together at the outset. And I would say also, each one of the stakeholders that are part of the process, we have this shared fate and ultimately delivering for the client. So it's transparency, it's commitment to dates, it's commitment to turnaround time. So we're armed with the information from the team to say, okay, test fits have been design review released. Now you're going to CDs, the duration is X. The turnaround on the expectation of a cursory review of those plans is 48 hours, whatever that is. Go to print. We can commit to, X amount of days to put the filing package together and sort of build that into your sequencing and schedule that then we ultimately report in on a weekly, bi-weekly, whatever the arrangement is, to keep the team connected. So all those pre-plannings are important.
Okay, great. So I've never planned a national rollout, but I've planned, like dinners and, trips. And so I know, no matter, I'm just a sales guy, but no matter what you do, things go wrong. So let's go, I guess with you, Al. I mean, what are the gotchas? Like, what are the things that frequently pop up even,
well, again, if we're able to get involved early and be released during a due diligence phase, there's a lot of different acronyms for these types of assessments of spaces, whether you want to call them PZRs or you can call them PCAs, property condition assessments, and a lot of them are looked at from a very generic standpoint of, okay, here's the zoning, here's your use, here's your parking, but really kind of digging in also as it relates to what are the skeletons on the property. So for us, it's really looking at that property profile, looking through zoning conditions, existing site plan resolution conditions that might, impact our planning for that particular property. Any issues with the fire marshal's office, any issues with the health department office, are there any ADA non-compliant path of travel issues with the property? A lot of times we come into a project where we're not looking to touch anything at the exterior, but you don't have adequate ADA parking to get parked in front of the building, and you don't have access to the path of travel, first pass to get even inside the building. So you may ultimately end up saying, okay, well, listen, you need to account for a feathering of your curb cut because your ramping ratios don't work. So there's a lot of things like along the ADA side of the business that we want to call out early. Signage requirements. Oftentimes, we look at wall signage, we look at blade signage, but sometimes the interior signage and graphics can also have some impacts, and certain jurisdictions will have more restrictive local standards to their window signage, and how close or far you can be from the storefront for it to be classified as a window sign or not. So a lot of details around that. Also, your project setup, your means and methods. So are there any issues where we need construction fences in place, you need scaffolding in place, you need sheds in place? What are the moratoriums during the time frame that you're looking to construct, if any? Let's call those out so that we don't get hit at the 11th hour with a surprise and say, oh, you're in the holiday embargo period. You're going to have a challenge now opening your store at that time. Also, when you're in mall environment, mall management processes, what are the landlord rules and regs, right? Make sure that we understand what the turnover times are for them to plan, review, approve. And in some cases, we need those plans to be stamped by mall management's PMO office in order to get into the billing department and get filed. Other state and county approvals alongside. We think we're dealing with a local municipality, but for whatever reason, plumbing and wastewater is handled at the county level. So making sure those are called out early on, to make sure we pick up on that. And then a little further down the line with construction admin, you may want to look at, do you need to bring new service in? What are those lead times? Even though, we often paint through the Con Eds and the PSE&Gs, at least if you know that up front and you know what to expect, you can also help your contracting team kind of plan that in. And then obviously any product, MSDS sheets on any shelving, freezers, different types of things that, from a product labeling standpoint, from a UL rating standpoint, you want to be able to make sure you can install them in the various jurisdictions you're in. So these are oftentimes snags that, come up either during plan review or during construction and before turnover that we like to call out at the outset.
Hey, I'm gonna actually mention something too, Al, that I think is what you were saying and it hit my mind. But something really important that we've permitted together as a team across the entire country, like almost every jurisdiction in this entire country we've been in, we've permitted, we've visited, we've seen. Understanding the culture of your local building department is really, really important. Understanding the culture of the building official, of your inspector, of how the city operates, is so different across the country, from the South to the East to Middle America. And I just wanted to add that point that I think it's so important to learn.
Yeah, oftentimes departments, don't speak to each other. So how do we get them to communicate? They all have different agendas, right? So how do we line up and accommodate those different agendas? And then you get staffing changes. They swell up at times, and they oftentimes, and like more so than not, decrease in staffing and so forth. So all of these types of things, if we can give you some real-time answers, they're important to scrape and give back to the client early on.
All right. Well, this sounds hard. So, Roy, what are some strategies that you use, given all those potential issues and gotchas and dynamics? I mean, do you have any specific approaches that you use at a high level to navigate this?
You're asking for our secret sauce?
Yes, I want to put it out there for everyone. We're going to record it, share it all around the country.
Yeah, definitely.
For revenue plummet.
I mean, so these are basically the strategies that we implement for all our clients. And first one, proper due diligence. I just saw a chat, but proper due diligence is very important. All the requirements, what departments we have to go through, full due diligence on every single project is very, very, very important. The next thing is finding out who the decision makers are in the city. We do that beforehand. When we get a project, who's the building official, who's the community development director, who's the economic development director, who's the mayor, and who's the city manager, who's the assistant city manager, and we make a little list just in case we need to tap into those people. If we think that we may need their help ahead of time, we'll introduce, hey, this is Roy from X, Y, and Z retailer, and we're excited to bring a store, and we're looking forward to a successful project. We don't even ask for help, so that when the time comes, I can ping the mayor's office, or I could ping the economic development director and say, hey, economic development director, we're bringing 150 jobs. We're investing $2.5 million into this space. We need to open our store on time. We cannot stay closed. And so reaching out to upper management is huge for us. Communication is key, weekly communication with the client, understanding, hey, are we going to make your deadlines? Are we not going to make your deadlines? Sending you weekly status updates on all the departments. And then prioritizing kind of what you need. Hey, ex-client, we're not going to make your grand opening because permits are taking X, Y, and Z, but we can get you early start. And we've asked the building inspector for a courtesy inspection so you could start framing after. And so kind of thinking outside the box is key. You do not want someone who just submits and picks up and submits and picks up. You want someone who thinks outside the box, and that is what permit expediting is.
So we've been talking about all the pieces. What might be fun is if you could, Roy, walk us through a case study and let's see how this all comes together.
You're making me sweat. Yeah, I definitely. I'd like. You know what? I'm actually going to give a quick example of thinking outside the box, and then I'm going to do the case study because kind of hand in hand. We had a project for Harbor Freight Tools, which is one of our clients. We've done 500 locations plus 110 a year or more, depending on their expansion year. We do every single permit in the country for them for the past 8 years, and we love them dearly. And we had to think outside the box. We weren't going to make our construction date, and the building official works once every 2 weeks. And so if you don't get him that one day, then you lost 2 weeks. And so I was like, we have to take this to the mayor because we need to start construction. Well, the mayor works once a week. And so I couldn't get hold of the mayor. We tried to get hold of the mayor, and we found out, hey, what does he do the rest of the time? He works at the local supermarket, the mayor does. So, and I'm telling you, understanding how cities are different. So I called the supermarket and I spoke to the mayor on the day where he was working at the supermarket, and got our project approved, made a construction start deadline, but we had to think outside the box. And that's a project case study that I just thought about. But you want an account case study? Let's talk about Sephora. Sephora is a great example of a retail rollout program who's expanding, very fast. If you look online, they're doing 100 stores a year. They have, very strong dates and deadlines that they have to meet. And Sephora was having basically, all their different architects permit every Sephora, and there was no cohesive system as to how do we know the status. In our real estate committee meetings, in the city management, in our management meetings with headquarters, how do we know the status? How do we know what's happening with every one of these projects? All we get is waiting on permit. I mean, they don't know what does that mean exactly. So they brought us in. We got together with all the architects who are doing a great job, and we set up our system. And every single week at every one of those board meetings that the real estate team has, they have a status of every single site, where it is in the permitting process, as well as where it is in the construction process if permits are issued. And they don't even call us anymore because we're running it. It's going well. I got a text from the VP today saying, you have made our life so much better. We're not missing any construction start dates. We're not missing any grand opening dates. And they have someone to go to when they're having inspection issues or any city issues. And so I think Sephora is a great case of how to run a successful program.
Yeah, it's just to add, Roy, it's really a license to transparency with the DOB, right? You work with us, we're going to give you a window, a view into what the realities are in that particular department. What's prevailing, even though we might have quoted it 6 months ago when the program was initially conceived. We're always fact checking what's the latest and greatest. Naturally, during COVID, we dealt with a lot of moving parts, right? And so there's a lot of shifts, and there continues to be. And so that is really part of the benefits of working with us is that transparency, understanding building code cycles and when they're going to hit and when you might be able to take advantage of a grace period, for example. That's a big thing as well, depending on where we land on the rollout. Local licensing, you may be working with a contracting firm that has a national presence, but each one of these municipalities, especially as it relates to their tradesmen, may have more restrictive local licensing. So when they go out and buy trades, they need to make sure, that they're going after outfits that obviously can work within those jurisdictions, so that you don't, waste time trying to find vendors while you're trying to get the job kicked off. So many different layers of how we add value. But Jason, I'll give it back to you.
Okay. Well, you mentioned COVID, and I think it's fair to say we're still dealing with it. In fact, we had a question here about it, basically asking about if you found the municipalities to be closed or very slow to respond. But maybe just go with the question, Al, is, what impact has COVID had from a permitting perspective? And I guess in this context, specifically for retail.
Yeah. So I guess I segued, not even knowing that was going to be next. But
so you're pro, Al.
Well, naturally, we dealt with a lot over the pandemic, and initially, naturally, we, like everybody else, we were all in it together. And even our clients, same thing. We want to make sure that wherever we could take advantage of getting our clients an essential construction status in any one of the cities that we worked in, we tried to do that not only for our clients, but for the greater community and us collectively as folks here. So at the end of the day, we worked, Roy's group and our group, on a real-time update for the industry to give them a view into current, lead times, what's going on at the city, who's remote, who's in, what are the staggered schedules. If we were able to pick this apart in various cities, this is what we did for the community, where we were able to give that back, and hopefully it helped you all along some of your existing projects in flight and helped you plan throughout. But I would say that, some of the major shifts were obviously shifts to virtual platforms. Some cities were much, much better equipped to pivot and do that quickly. Others not. But in the grand scheme of things, I think it's a benefit to everyone that we've gone more digital in terms of uploading plans and dealing with examiners via these virtual platforms that we're on today. And so that helped in a lot of ways, but it also created a bigger pipeline of projects. And so the funnel got tighter and tighter, right? So naturally lead times got extended, staffing was reduced. So, and we all felt it. But in terms of major trends and so forth, I mean, as far as some of the geographies, I would say certainly, alongside what the demographics was doing was what the retailers were doing, right? So the Sun Belt got really busy, Midwest really busy. So certain areas of the country obviously swelled in terms of activity, just kind of followed the population around and where folks were flighting to. And then as far as, some of the essential retailers really trying to accommodate both sides of the buying trends, right? Obviously going online. So you had the delivery model, local delivery, but you also had curbside pickup. Some folks wanting to come to the store. So you had a lot more modification of curbs and sort of accommodating, maybe what was storage and back of house now became front of house to make it easier for curbside pickup activities at a lot of these, larger big box retailers. So we saw a lot of those types of trends as well. But it's also not just there's an exodus kind of thesis here too from major urban centers, but there was also, now we're seeing an influx of other foreign companies, foreign concepts coming in and looking to obviously find some deals given the state of some of our urban downtowns, and rents have obviously changed a little bit as well. So there's been looks to take opportunities there as well. So some of these threads and currents that are developed and continue to take shape as we move into the next few months and years ahead. So we'll see. But we're naturally on the forefront of a lot of these, and hope to keep you guys informed on latest and greatest.
So, Roy, let me ask you, this is a little bit of a softball, but you mentioned before, I mean, if you're contemplating a rollout, nationally, what's the value of someone like us, right? What's the role that we play? You mentioned a little bit before about transparency, but take that a little farther.
Yeah, absolutely. The benefits of how is ensuring our schedule is maintained, ensuring, as Al said, transparency with the city, and you have someone there full time to devote to just getting you that approval, as opposed to if you're an architect or you're an engineer, you're spending 85% of your time designing, creating CDs. We're spending 100% of our time making sure the project gets approved as quickly as possible. In addition to that, you get me and Al, but you get Millrose, you get the entire company and people who've worked in all cities and have relationships with different cities across the country. So you have the relationships, you have the entire company behind you, and you have someone there pushing all day, every day to get the project approved as quickly as possible. And that's, I think, the biggest benefit.
Great.
Yeah, and just to add, I mean, our project managers are constantly kept abreast of code changes alongside our code and zoning teams, and as well as processes, changes in fee schedule, whatever it is. I mean, we're constantly at the forefront of that. And I think, to Roy's point, you have access to top shelf talent that are not only process experts, but code and relationship drivers. Really just being an extension and liaison for the team, where we're nimble and we're basically always trying to provide real-time information back into the client, so everyone is kept honest, everyone's got shared fate, and essentially everyone can do what they do best, and provide their expertise back to the client.
Super, thanks for that. So let's get to some questions. Before we get to the questions, I wanted to just share that we have another webinar that you might be interested in. This one's hosted by NYC Builds Bio. One of our own, Gus, is going to be on this panel. So please join us on Tuesday, June 8th at 1 o'clock Eastern to learn a little bit about the biosciences field. So with that, here's a question that came in. What differences do you guys see when the permit set is set up with greater details and visualizations? So more user experience focused versus the type index of drawings, the typical index of drawings.
Al?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I understand the question, because if there are more visual components to the drawing set, I would assume that's more for potentially an architectural review or planning and zoning submittal. But when you talk about once you've secured those entitlements and you're moving on to the building department, the building officials and fire officials, and they really want to get into the details of the code and fire rated separations and proper exiting and proper fire extinguishing and sprinkler coverage and fire protection. So maybe I'm not understanding the question properly, but obviously sometimes less is more when it relates to filing construction applications. Oftentimes, any let's say signage or things of that nature, because they trip, or exterior modifications because they trip an architectural review, and you may want to get started sooner. A lot of times we often recommend you pull that off the plans or reference it to say filed separately on the separate application. Hopefully that answers the question.
Okay. And please submit questions through the Q&A section down there. While we're waiting for those to start coming in, there's typically a delay. You kind of mentioned this before a little bit, but there's definitely been a demographic shift over the last year, right? People moving from major cities. I mean, I live in Central Virginia, and major city money is driving my price up on my home daily. Have there been any impacts of that you've seen?
I can answer that.
Please do.
Go for it, Roy.
So, have there been, well, your question, well, there have been impacts in this shift in movement. And I'll give you an example. Houston is just busy right now. Actually, Texas in general as a state is super busy. You see a lot of people moving, a lot of people from California going to Texas. And so if you look at Houston right now, if you look at city of Austin right now, they are swamped. It's the same head count as they had before, but they're so inundated with projects. The electrical department right now in Houston is running a minimum of 6 weeks for every cycle. You know, you're averaging 2 or 3 cycles, and there is no expedited, there's no overtime for electrical. So this influx of work, this influx of building residential, retail, commercial, so on and so forth, has caused a huge backlog in some of these cities. And I think it's important to identify when you're moving into a market that's very, very hot, that things could be a bit slower right now.
Great. Here's an interesting question. Since most municipalities are doing permits online now, do you find that to be easier, or do you prefer the old-fashioned face-to-face approach?
So happy somebody asked that. I'm so happy somebody asked that. Al, you want to take it?
Yeah, either way. I mean, it's interesting because, you know, not only are we code consultants and permit consultants, but we've become technology consultants too now with the online portal. So it's just as, if not more difficult, in my opinion, at least, being on the cusp of generations here, to do the online submittal, because you need to, whereas in real time you were able to be down there, hard set of drawings, you see the stamp, you're able to secure the stamp, you know it's in, you got the control number, you know, you pretty much real time were able to grasp it, touch it, feel it, and update the client and the team on what you did. Whereas in the online portal, while theoretically it should be instantaneous, sometimes there are back of house, you know, activities that, you know, you can't naturally have access to, just given the fact that it's online. So it's a little bit of both. It's a good question. I think there are moments where you still need boots. You still need to get down there. You know, you still need to help move the paper along, as we say. So great question, but Roy, if you want to round it out, go for it.
Yeah, the notion of it's online submittal, I could do it myself, it's going to be frank, is false. It is absolutely false. If you think it's online and it's easier, you could do it yourself from your computer, and you don't do this for a living, you don't do it often, you're wrong. It's much more difficult. It's much more complex. There's, you know, naming the files, file size, making sure each, you know, tasks are checked off, making sure the reviewers each get it routed to, calling the city, hey, did you get this routed in an email? You know, they miss an email. They don't see that they have the task assigned to them. So it was a lot easier going there in person and being able to sit down with a reviewer, in a lot of cities that do that, and review it on the spot or set up an appointment plan check. But it's going to take some learning, and it definitely could be tedious in some cases, the online process.
One wrong click and you can send also your application down a completely different
Absolutely.
path. You know,
Absolutely.
where you know, all of a sudden the series of prerequisites get flagged, and then you get stuck in the mire of an administrative correction that should have never been, right? So seems like it simplifies theoretically, but in actuality, I agree with Roy 100%. Of course I would, but naturally, we live and breathe it every day, so we know.
I can't wait till you buy me lunch.
Are you implying that thousands of municipalities haven't got the best processes and systems in place to administer?
No, everybody's doing it right.
All right, great. Well, listen, let's just wrap this up. Roy and Al, thanks so much for this. The attendees stayed on until the very end. They're still here, in fact, which is a sign of a great and entertaining and interesting event. Let me just remind everyone that we'll be well, obviously we have recorded it. We'll be editing and posting it and then sending around a link for you to share with your folks. So again, I thank you for your time. I hope you have a nice afternoon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining, and hopefully you found it helpful.
Definitely.